Hello, D&D enthusiasts, and welcome to a very special episode, a chat with one of our research colleagues looking into Dungeons and Dragons for leisure. My name is CJ, as always, and today I am chatting to Emily Messina, an associate professor of rehabilitation and recreational therapy at Florida International University, where she directs the rehabilitation and recreational therapy program. Her research focuses on leisure as coping and leisure within marginalized population groups, with a particular emphasis lately on tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons as a form of serious leisure. Her recent published research examines D&D through the lens of Stebbins Serious Leisure Framework, exploring how long-term commitment to gaming fosters skill development, social connection, and well-being. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So I was really excited to read your paper. I run a network of doctors who play Dungeons and Dragons for leisure. And one of the things we're, I guess, not struggling with, but we're trying to get some research done on the group and we're trying to review the literature. And your article was actually very, very comprehensive and one of the standouts when I started looking at the literature. Tell us a bit about what you do.
Great. Yeah. So I am a recreational therapist. I am currently the program director for the Rehabilitation and Recreational Therapy program at Florida International University. Mainly, recreational therapy works with individuals with disabilities, varying diagnoses in using recreation as rehabilitation and recreation as therapy. I also serve as a leisure researcher. I like to look at the role of leisure in coping with various populations. And that's kind of how I ended up diving into this particular study on Dungeons and Dragons. Is I watched one of the scenes within Stranger Things where they were battling it out against one another with one another, and it was kind of this play on play with the basketball scene. And I thought, gosh, that looks fantastic, and I would just love to know how people feel in those moments, like what that means for them, and kind of the approach to viewing it as serious leisure. I had become familiar with the concept of serious leisure coined by Robert Stebbins, the sociologist, years prior in graduate school. And I wanted to just kind of dive into it and see how it's conceptualized and if it kind of meets that criteria that's been established for serious leisure. And that's kind of what brought me to this particular study.
And I guess for our listeners, serious leisure can be anything from a long-term commitment to yoga through to tabletop role-playing games. Where do you think you're going having done this research? So what do you think is the next steps for you? Where do you see the studies taking you?
So with this particular study, I'm hoping it'll go in two directions. So one, I as I mentioned, I'm a recreational therapist. I also teach a leisure education class in a local prison. And so one of the things we do there is we kind of talk about the use of leisure for benefits and how we can use leisure to structure our time. There is a active D&D group at that particular prison. So I'm really hoping to kind of tap into that and speak with them about the benefits that they get. It's really interesting to see how they conceptualize the benefits of leisure in general, particularly when everything else is decided for them. So I'm excited to see where those participants kind of take the concept of serious leisure and leisure in general and leisure as coping. And then with this particular study as well, as I kind of want to look at the interconnections of responsibility and kind of life structure as it relates to being able to engage in serious leisure. One of the things that I noted at the end of this article was most of the individuals that I spoke with had been playing for years, but there was kind of this dichotomy between the younger players and the older players. And I kind of wanted to see how the life responsibilities, family responsibilities, work responsibilities, how that kind of played into who continues playing and who might stop in their younger years and not get a chance to continue with the same campaign through the years.
And I think there's a lot of meat on the bone there with that idea of generational change. I do want to come back to the prison point, but just sticking with that generational change point, that really resonates with what I've found down here in Australia. A lot of the studies are on younger people and how it affects stress and anxiety. There was a small study from James Cook University, for example. But what I'm finding with the doctors group is there is all these people who've lost their tribe through medical school, or they had a tribe, but they've had to move for rotations, or they've gone into parenting and they've just completely lost social cohesion. And they're looking for something that is not an excuse, but a way of connecting with a regular long-term commitment to leisure, something that brings them around a table with some mates every once in a while. And there is probably a different need for those people. Those people need maybe half an hour to 1.5 hour sessions after the kids have gone to bed around work with a high flexibility and ability to pull out if they get called in. Whereas when they're younger, you play for 4 hours, you play a weekend if needed.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things that I saw in sort of the responses is how whether or not that continued through the years and how those responsibilities ended up impacting their gameplay. But it's so important, or I found that it's such an important element of serious leisure is yes, your casual leisure can have these social benefits. And as a recreational therapist, I tell my clients that there's, physical, social, emotional, cognitive benefits to leisure pursuits in general. But it's really that social connection that's fostered through that serious leisure is the same people or the same folks who are doing the same thing and focusing on the same elements. And that's especially present within these campaigns that might last years to years.
If I could swing back to the other point for a second, talking about prison work, how did that come about? And if you're able to say anything that you've seen already from that work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, professionally, before I went back to graduate school, I worked as a rehabilitation therapist for the state of Florida. It was at a maximum security forensic mental health treatment facility. So, all of the residents were adult males, all of whom had criminal charges and serious mental illness. And that's kind of where I ended up going. That's why I went back to graduate school was to kind of look at the role that recreation can play with that population. At the time, my job consisted of I facilitated music and art activities for the residents, and so I went back to school and worked on my doctorate, and then came back to that facility and did my dissertation there, kind of looking at the role of recreational pursuits in their recovery process. Now that I'm working back in the state of Florida within academia and have a little bit more research time in my schedule, I started to kind of get back into the research population, looking at kind of the role of recreation within correctional settings. So this particular facility, I'm there as a volunteer. I do a leisure education class. It's not tied to research directly. One of my long-term goals for this particular facility, though, is to get permission to kind of look at particularly the D&D group that's going on right now, kind of what they get out of that experience.
And when I started looking at the literature, it doesn't surprise me that there's all these areas that I'm not aware of because there's psychologists in Australia who use D&D for therapy. There are people, posting on Reddit to use it as pseudotherapy without formal qualifications per se. And there's everything from some work with veterans going on in the US through to work with neurodivergent kids in a couple of countries. I think it's a really promising area. I think the trouble I have sometimes is I can see so much potential and I'm really just waiting for the high level research to come through on multiple papers and multiple levels. I'm hoping it comes through soon. I was really excited about your work, particularly because I could sort of see that starting to translate through. Do you know of other people who are doing big projects, or I guess when is this going to be day-to-day clinical stuff?
I was actually introduced to the idea of D&D as a therapeutic endeavor by a student that I had at my previous institution in Washington State, and the concept is there. I will say that it's difficult, at least from the recreational therapy perspective, it's difficult because of the continued nature of the campaigns, right? And so we might see clients, and we are a well-suited discipline, I might add, to contribute to the literature because recreation is what we do, and we can see that benefit from a physical, social, emotional, cognitive, sometimes even spiritual element of tabletop games in general, not even just specifically D&D. But I think one of the difficulties with D&D specifically is the continuation of the campaigns. And we're seeing patients or clients, at least at the clinical level, who are coming and going so quickly that we're not really getting or being able to tap into that continued social connection that occurs on a regular basis. And so I think, at least from my perspective, that might be one of the biggest hindrances in really seeing that clinical work start to take hold within D&D, is because it's so difficult to get that long-term relationship in an institutional setting, which is part of the reason I'm so excited about the possibility of looking at this within a correctional setting, because they're there with each other and it is a long-term relationship and they've got an ongoing campaign. So.
And that makes sense. I think the biggest difficulty we've faced in getting a bunch of doctors to play D&D is rostering them and getting them to the same table, because it ends up being irregular days. Like you've just got to find days that match up for different people's schedules. And there's this Venn diagram probably of people, D&D players and doctors, and there's a tiny overlap with it's people who are difficult to roster, and it is a challenge, but I'm sure it can be done for most groups.
Mhm.
I don't know in my head how many sessions you'd have to see benefit, and I'm sure that'll come out eventually. I think the last study I read was about 8 weeks. I haven't seen anything smaller than that, but yeah. Anyway. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about from this study, or anything else you want to get into?
Yeah, I think it was an interesting opportunity. It was a good chance that the folks that I spoke to had been playing for years to decades, and so it was a really good chance to kind of get a pulse on whether or not D&D kind of fits in this conceptualization of serious leisure. And it did, in fact, check all of the boxes, even some of the more recent definitions of serious leisure as it relates to sort of cultural representation and just kind of finding identity within that group. And so it was a really fun project to work on.
Yeah. And I should say that our chat today is of a personal nature. Our views don't necessarily represent any organizations we're associated with. But if anyone is listening from Wizards of the Coast and would like to collaborate on anything, or any of the D&D community is interested in collaborating, reach out to us. We're around. I think that is a very nice chat. Emily, I'm very glad you could join us from America today. I know it's getting a bit
Yeah.
late over there for you guys.
Yeah.
But thank you for coming along and telling your story. And we look forward to seeing what research you put out in the future.
Great. Thank you for having me. This was great.